Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in history when heaven responds to the urgency of the earth, when time collides with eternity and divine authority is released to interrupt every agenda of darkness. This is not an ordinary gathering, and this is not an ordinary prayer. This is a moment of alignment, a moment of spiritual recalibration, a moment when what was secretly assigned against you is openly confronted by the power of God. On this Thursday, January 15th, 2026, we step into a decisive hour where faith is no longer passive, silence is no longer an option, and prayer becomes a weapon of precision. You did not arrive here by accident. You are here because something has been moving behind the scenes, something unseen but intentional, and heaven has summoned you to take your stand. There are assignments that were crafted in the shadows, words spoken in secret, plans released to delay, distract, and destroy. But no scheme is greater than divine authority. When prayer is activated with revelation, it becomes atomic, targeted, forceful, and unstoppable, canceling every evil instruction before it manifests. This is the kind of prayer that does not beg, but declares. It does not fear, but confronts. It does not retreat, but advances with confidence, knowing that spiritual authority has already been granted. Tonight is about reclaiming territory, dismantling opposition, and enforcing what heaven has already written concerning your life. What was meant to intimidate you will not survive this atmosphere. What was sent to monitor you will lose its assignment. What was designed to wear you down will be reversed by divine power. As faith rises, clarity comes. As prayer intensifies, resistance breaks. This is a moment to speak with boldness, to pray with understanding, and to stand with the assurance that no evil assignment can override a life covered by divine authority. Heaven is attentive, power is available, and the moment to cancel every plan that never had permission has arrived. Divine authority is not a concept reserved for a select few, nor is it an abstract idea meant to inspire without substance. It is a tangible, God-given right bestowed upon those who understand their position in the spiritual realm and are willing to exercise it with confidence and clarity. To cancel every evil assignment, one must first recognize that authority is not borrowed from emotion, volume, or circumstance, but flows directly from alignment with divine will. When heaven authorizes a believer, no opposing force can legitimately overrule that mandate. Every evil assignment is rooted in intention. It is planned, dispatched, and enforced through spiritual channels that operate in secrecy and timing. Yet no assignment, no matter how calculated, can stand when confronted by divine authority properly activated. Authority is not about reacting to darkness, but about preempting it. It shifts the believer from a defensive posture into a commanding position where spiritual interference is confronted before it manifests in the natural realm. When authority speaks, opposition must respond. Understanding divine authority requires a shift in mindset. Too often, people pray from a place of desperation rather than dominion, asking instead of declaring, hoping instead of enforcing. Authority changes the language of prayer. It replaces pleading with proclamation and uncertainty with conviction. When you pray with authority, you are not attempting to persuade heaven. You are aligning with what has already been established. You speak because permission has been granted, and you command because jurisdiction has been assigned. Evil assignments thrive on ignorance, fear, and silence. They gain strength when believers are unaware of their rights or hesitant to act. Divine authority disrupts this advantage by exposing what was hidden and confronting what was operating unchecked. It gives the believer the ability to identify interference, name it, and cancel it at the root. Authority does not negotiate with darkness, it overrides it. What was sent to delay progress, sabotage purpose, or weaken resolve is dismantled when authority is exercised with precision. Canceling an evil assignment is not about engaging in spiritual theatrics. It is about legal enforcement. In the spiritual realm, authority operates on legality. When something does not have divine permission, it has no right to remain. Divine authority empowers the believer to issue cease and desist orders against every unauthorized operation affecting their life, family, calling, and future. This authority does not depend on how long the assignment has been active or how deeply it appears entrenched. One authoritative declaration can terminate what has been operating for years. Authority also requires responsibility. It demands discernment, discipline, and alignment. You cannot effectively cancel what you refuse to confront, and you cannot confront what you refuse to acknowledge. Divine authority sharpens spiritual awareness, enabling believers to sense resistance, recognize patterns, and discern when opposition is at work. With this awareness comes the confidence to act, not impulsively, but strategically, speaking with clarity and purpose. When divine authority is exercised, it creates spiritual disruption. Systems that relied on access are suddenly cut off. Channels that once carried opposition are shut down. Assignments that were progressing unnoticed are aborted mid-operation. Authority establishes boundaries that darkness cannot cross. It declares limits, enforces restrictions, and restores order where chaos was intended. This authority is not activated by noise, but by alignment. It flows from a life submitted to divine governance and a spirit disciplined to hear and respond. When authority is aligned, words carry weight, declarations carry force, and prayer becomes an instrument of enforcement. Every evil assignment, regardless of its origin or intent, must bow to authority that is rooted in truth, backed by heaven, and released without hesitation. As authority is exercised consistently, it reshapes spiritual outcomes. What once seemed resistant begins to yield. What once appeared delayed begins to move. What once felt oppressive begins to lift. Authority does not wait for permission from circumstances. It commands circumstances to align. It establishes dominance over fear, confusion, and intimidation, reminding every opposing force that its time has expired. Divine authority restores confidence to the believer. It replaces uncertainty with assurance and replaces wariness with resolve. It reminds you that you were never meant to be a victim of unseen battles, but an enforcer of divine order. Every evil assignment depends on your silence to survive. But when authority speaks, survival is no longer an option. Atomic prayer is not ordinary prayer intensified by emotion. It is prayer refined by revelation and released with precision. It is targeted, intentional, and governed by understanding. Just as an atomic force concentrates immense power into a focused release, atomic prayer compresses spiritual authority, faith, and alignment into declarations that penetrate resistance and dismantle opposition at its core. This kind of prayer does not scatter words into the atmosphere, hoping for impact. It delivers force exactly where interference is operating. spiritual opposition is rarely random. It follows patterns, assignments, and access points. Atomic prayer recognizes that broad, unfocused praying often creates spiritual noise without producing lasting results. Precision shifts the outcome. When prayer is guided by discernment, it identifies the root rather than addressing symptoms. Instead of repeatedly praying about delay, atomic prayer confronts the source of obstruction. Instead of reacting to pressure, it interrupts the system generating that pressure. A weapon is only effective when it is properly aimed. Atomic prayer functions as a weapon of precision because it is grounded in authority and executed with clarity. It does not ask darkness to leave, it commands it to disengage. Precision prayer speaks directly to systems, cycles, patterns, and assignments, calling them by function and stripping them of influence. This level of prayer understands that vague language produces vague outcomes, but intentional declarations produce measurable spiritual shifts. Precision in prayer requires spiritual intelligence. It demands awareness of timing, language, and jurisdiction. Atomic prayer is released at moments when resistance is exposed and opportunity is present. It does not rush ahead of alignment, nor does it hesitate when authority is required. It understands when to war, when to declare, and when to silence opposition through decisive command. This intelligence transforms prayer from routine practice into strategic engagement. Atomic prayer also understands containment. Power without containment is dangerous, but power with structure is unstoppable. Precision ensures that prayer does not backfire into exhaustion or confusion. It channels energy efficiently, conserving spiritual strength while maximizing impact. Rather than engaging every battle, atomic prayer targets the command center. When the source is dismantled, the surrounding effects collapse naturally. The language of atomic prayer is deliberate. Words are chosen carefully because they carry authority and establish boundaries. Every declaration creates a legal framework that governs what can and cannot operate. Precision language closes doors, revokes access, and terminates permissions that were previously exploited. When prayer is spoken with accuracy, it leaves no room for reinterpretation by opposing forces. Atomic prayer is not fueled by anger or fear, but by certainty. It flows from the confidence that authority has already been granted and that outcomes are enforceable. This certainty removes hesitation and strengthens resolve. When a believer prays with precision, there is no need for repetition born of doubt. One aligned declaration carries more weight than countless unfocused words. This form of prayer also accelerates results. Precision reduces delay by eliminating unnecessary engagement. Instead of wrestling with every manifestation of resistance, atomic prayer neutralizes the cause, allowing progress to resume unhindered. It shifts spiritual momentum, turning prolonged battles into decisive victories. What once required sustained effort is resolved through strategic enforcement. Atomic prayer disrupts monitoring systems, breaks communication lines, and disables reinforcement. Because it targets infrastructure rather than surface activity, it creates lasting impact. Opposition is not merely pushed back, it is dismantled. Precision ensures that what is canceled cannot reorganize or return through another channel. When believers embrace atomic prayer, their posture changes. They move from reaction to initiation, from endurance to enforcement. Prayer becomes an instrument of governance rather than survival. This posture establishes dominance in the spiritual environment, making it clear that unauthorized activity will not be tolerated. Precision prayer also sharpens discernment over time. As believers witness the effectiveness of targeted declarations, sensitivity increases. Patterns become clearer, resistance becomes easier to identify, and response becomes quicker. Atomic prayer trains the spirit to recognize interference early and address it decisively before it escalates. This weapon of precision does not rely on volume, duration, or repetition, but on alignment, authority, and accuracy. It understands that a single, well-aimed declaration can accomplish what extended struggle could not. When atomic prayer is released, it leaves no ambiguity, no loopholes, and no space for opposition to remain operational. Hidden agendas thrive in silence, subtlety, and repetition. They are rarely loud or obvious because their strength lies in remaining undetected while gradually influencing outcomes. Unseen opposition works patiently, embedding itself into routines, relationships, and cycles that appear normal on the surface, but are engineered to produce stagnation, confusion, or delay. To disrupt such agendas, one must first understand that not every battle announces itself, and not every setback is accidental. Unseen opposition often operates through patterns rather than events. A single obstacle may seem insignificant, but repeated resistance in the same area reveals intentional interference. These patterns are designed to normalize limitation, convincing individuals that struggle is inevitable or permanent. Disruption begins when discernment exposes repetition as strategy. Once awareness is activated, what was hidden loses its advantage, because secrecy is the currency of opposition. Hidden agendas rely on access. They function through permissions granted consciously or unconsciously, through words spoken carelessly, agreements made in ignorance, or boundaries left unguarded. Disrupting these agendas requires identifying where access was gained and revoking it with authority. Opposition cannot function where permission is withdrawn. When access points are sealed, influence collapses. Unseen opposition also manipulates timing. Delays are introduced not to stop progress entirely, but to wear down resolve. The longer something is postponed, the more likely doubt, frustration, and compromise will emerge. Disruption interrupts this strategy by restoring urgency and momentum. When timing is reclaimed, opposition loses its leverage. Movement resumes, and stalled areas begin to shift. These agendas are sustained by distraction. Focus is diverted towards secondary issues, emotional reactions, or surface level conflicts to keep attention away from the true source of resistance. Disruption requires discipline to look beyond what is immediately visible. When focus is sharpened, energy is redirected toward dismantling the root rather than managing symptoms. Unseen opposition often embeds itself in familiar spaces. It may operate through environments, conversations, or systems that feel comfortable and unthreatening. This familiarity lowers defenses and delays confrontation. Disruption challenges comfort by demanding evaluation. What has been tolerated must be questioned. What has been accepted must be examined. Exposure destabilizes opposition because it was never designed to withstand scrutiny. Hidden agendas also exploit fatigue. Prolonged resistance drains energy, making disengagement seem easier than confrontation. Disruption restores strength by shifting from endurance to enforcement. Instead of enduring pressure, authority is exercised to remove it. This shift conserves energy and restores clarity, enabling decisive action rather than continual struggle. Unseen opposition depends on misdirection. Attention is drawn to peripheral battles while the central mechanism continues unchecked. Disruption refocuses engagement on the command structure. When leadership is dismantled, subordinate systems collapse. Addressing the source eliminates the need to fight every manifestation. Breaking hidden agendas requires consistency. Exposure alone is not enough. Enforcement must follow. Authority must be applied repeatedly until influence is fully neutralized. This consistency communicates that resistance will not be tolerated and that access will not be regained. Over time, the environment adjusts to this new standard. Disruption also alters internal narratives. Hidden agendas often succeed by shaping perception, causing individuals to internalize limitation as identity. When opposition is exposed and confronted, perspective shifts. What was once interpreted as personal failure is recognized as external interference. This recognition restores confidence and removes misplaced self-blame. Unseen opposition loses power when named. Identification brings accountability, and accountability brings termination. When patterns, cycles, and influences are clearly identified, they can be addressed directly. Vague awareness produces minimal change, but precise identification produces decisive results. Disrupting hidden agendas is not about constant confrontation, but about strategic interruption. It is the intentional refusal to allow unseen forces to dictate outcomes. As disruption becomes habitual, sensitivity increases. Early warning signs are recognized, and intervention happens sooner. Over time, this posture creates an environment hostile to opposition. Hidden agendas cannot survive where awareness is high, boundaries are firm, and authority is consistently exercised. The unseen becomes visible, the subtle becomes obvious, and the manipulative loses effectiveness. What once operated quietly is forced into exposure, and exposure dismantles influence. Destiny is not a vague idea reserved for the future. It is an intentional path that responds to voice, alignment, and action. Reclaiming destiny begins with understanding that what has been delayed, diverted, or disrupted can be restored when bold declarations are released with authority. Silence allows interference to continue unchecked, but declarations interrupt patterns and reset direction. When the voice is activated, destiny responds. Bold declarations are not expressions of wishful thinking. They are authoritative statements rooted in conviction. They establish spiritual boundaries and define what is permitted to operate. When declarations are spoken with clarity, they confront resistance directly and dismantle narratives that were never meant to govern outcomes. Destiny shifts when language changes, because words shape pathways and determine movement. Interference often attempts to redefine destiny by introducing alternatives disguised as compromises. These alternatives promise relief, but ultimately lead away from original purpose. Bold declarations reject substitutes and reaffirm alignment with what was originally assigned. By declaring what will and will not be accepted, direction is corrected and deviation is halted. Reclaiming destiny also requires consistency in speech. Sporadic declarations create temporary disruption, but sustained declaration establishes permanence. Repetition reinforces authority, not because power is lacking, but because environments adjust through consistent enforcement. Over time, consistent declarations reprogram patterns that were shaped by prolonged opposition. Declarations also function as announcements. They signal to the spiritual environment that governance has shifted. What once operated without resistance now encounters authority. These announcements remove ambiguity and clarify jurisdiction. Destiny accelerates when the environment understands that unauthorized interference will no longer be tolerated. Bold declarations restore confidence. Opposition thrives when confidence is eroded, creating hesitation and doubt. Speaking with authority rebuilds internal alignment, reminding the believer of their position and purpose. Confidence is not arrogance, it is clarity about assignment. When clarity is restored, movement resumes. Language carries momentum. Declarations propel action by aligning thought, emotion, and intention. When destiny is spoken, it becomes actionable. Words create expectancy, and expectancy fuels engagement. Reclaiming destiny requires participation, and declarations initiate that participation by aligning inner conviction with outward action. Declarations also close doors. By clearly stating what is rejected, access points are sealed. Opposition loses leverage when boundaries are articulated. Destiny is protected when limits are enforced. This protection ensures that progress is not repeatedly undermined by the same patterns. Bold declarations shift focus from what was lost to what is possible. They redirect attention away from setbacks and toward assignment. This shift restores vision and renews motivation. When vision is clear, decisions become easier and distractions lose appeal. Reclaiming destiny through declaration requires courage. Speaking against visible circumstances can feel risky, but authority is not validated by conditions. Declarations are made because alignment exists, not because evidence is present. Over time, alignment produces evidence. Declarations also dismantle fear-based narratives. Fear thrives on uncertainty and silence. Bold speech confronts fear directly, replacing it with certainty and resolve. As fear diminishes, freedom increases, allowing destiny to unfold without restraint. This process also strengthens discernment. As declarations are released, sensitivity to alignment increases. What supports destiny becomes clearer, and what hinders it becomes more obvious. Decisions are made with greater precision, reducing detours and delays. Reclaiming destiny is not about forcing outcomes, but about enforcing alignment. Bold declarations ensure that movement remains consistent with purpose. They act as continual course corrections, keeping direction steady despite resistance. When declarations become habitual, destiny becomes resilient. Opposition encounters immediate resistance, and interference is addressed before it escalates. Over time, the path stabilizes, progress becomes consistent, and purpose is expressed with greater clarity, and impact. Enforcing heaven's verdict begins with the understanding that every attack already carries a limitation placed on it by divine order. No opposition operates without boundaries, even when it appears aggressive or overwhelming. Heaven's verdict establishes what is permitted and what is prohibited, and enforcement is the act of aligning earthly reality with that higher ruling. Attacks lose their authority when the verdict against them is recognized and applied. Every attack relies on uncertainty to maintain momentum. When individuals are unclear about what heaven has already decided, opposition exploits that hesitation. Enforcement removes ambiguity. It affirms that decisions have already been rendered, outcomes have already been established, and resistance is operating illegally. Once illegitimacy is exposed, attacks lose credibility and influence. Heaven's verdict is not reactive, it is preemptive. It speaks before the attack manifests and remains in effect regardless of intensity. Enforcement does not wait for escalation, it responds to alignment. When enforcement is active, attacks are intercepted early, often before they are fully formed. This proactive posture minimizes damage and preserves momentum. Attacks often attempt to redefine identity, convincing individuals that they are vulnerable, unprotected, or unqualified. Heaven's verdict contradicts these narratives by affirming position and authority. Enforcement reinforces identity, reminding the believer who they are and what they carry. When identity is secure, attacks struggle to find traction. Enforcement also requires recognition of jurisdiction. Not every voice, influence, or circumstance has the right to occupy space. Heaven's verdict determines jurisdiction, and enforcement removes what does not belong. This removal is not emotional, it is procedural. What is out of order is corrected, and what is unauthorized is expelled. Attacks thrive in disorder. Confusion creates openings, and disorder weakens defenses. Enforcing Heaven's verdict restores order by re-establishing divine structure. When order is restored, attacks lose efficiency. Their strategies become ineffective because the environment no longer supports them. This enforcement is carried out through alignment of thought, speech, and action. When these elements agree with Heaven's verdict, authority is expressed consistently. Inconsistency weakens enforcement, but alignment strengthens it. Every alignment decision reinforces the verdict and reduces the effectiveness of opposition. Heaven's verdict also carries finality. Attacks often persist by creating the illusion of permanence, suggesting that resistance is ongoing and unresolved. Enforcement introduces finality by declaring that the matter is settled. This declaration shifts perspective and disrupts the cycle of repeated engagement. Enforcement requires confidence, not aggression. Aggression often signals insecurity, while confidence reflects certainty. Heaven's verdict does not need to be defended. It needs to be applied. Calm authority carries more weight than frantic resistance. When enforcement is confident, attacks lose their psychological advantage. Attacks may attempt to adapt, changing form or strategy when confronted. Enforcement anticipates adaptation by maintaining consistency. When boundaries are consistently enforced, adaptation becomes futile. Opposition cannot reorganize when access is repeatedly denied. Enforcing Heaven's verdict also strengthens resilience. Each successful enforcement reinforces trust in authority and builds confidence in alignment. Over time, resilience increases and attacks become less disruptive. What once caused delay becomes a signal for enforcement. This process also sharpens awareness. As enforcement becomes habitual, sensitivity to early signs of attack increases. Early intervention prevents escalation, conserving energy and focus. Awareness transforms enforcement from reaction to maintenance. Heaven's verdict is comprehensive. It addresses not only external attacks, but internal vulnerabilities. Enforcement includes correcting thought patterns, language, and behaviors that create access. When internal alignment is restored, external attacks lose entry points. Attacks often attempt to isolate, creating the sense of being targeted alone. Heaven's verdict reaffirms connection and support. Enforcement restores perspective, reminding the believer that they are part of a larger order and not standing alone. When enforcement is sustained, the environment adjusts. What once resisted begins to comply. Pressure decreases, clarity increases, and movement resumes. Heaven's verdict establishes the standard, and enforcement ensures that the standard governs every interaction, decision, and outcome. Now is the moment to stand firm in what has been declared and enforced, knowing that nothing spoken in alignment with heaven returns void. Let faith anchor your posture. Let authority govern your voice, and let confidence replace every trace of hesitation. What has been confronted is dismantled. What has been challenged is subdued, and what has attempted to rise against divine order has been brought into submission. As you move forward, carry this awareness with boldness, walk with clarity, and remain unshaken in the assurance that heaven's verdict stands supreme, active, and irreversible over your life, your purpose, and everything connected to you.